join the session. I always like to do a fun audio test exercise for myself, but I think it's also really helpful when it shows just how diverse our learning community is, and especially our prospective student audience. If you can go ahead and type in the Q&A box, I know that's slightly counterintuitive, but we currently have the chat closed. So if you type in the Q&A box where you're joining us from, I think it's always a fun exercise in terms of just the diverse nature of geography. I'll go first. I won't type it. I'll say it. I'm in New York right now. So, okay, I'm seeing them come in. Excellent. Brazil, Talita, welcome. We're going to have a info session with the Global Center Rio soon, Talita. So look out for that email. Mongolia, Meg, excellent. Queens, welcome, Sam. Right across the East River. Chicago, we got Syracuse in the house. My colleague Damaris Diaz was just in Syracuse. Washington, D.C., excellent. Mississippi, Berlin, Fairfield. DC's popular, right, Grayson? I feel like everybody, I heard a lot of students went down to DC this past summer.
Yeah, there's always a DC contingent.
A big DC contingent. Brooklyn, welcome, Anna. Another DC, Long Beach, California, Justin. Bangladesh, welcome. Mumbai, excellent, welcome. Berkeley, forgive me, Damaris Diaz was just at UC Berkeley, funny enough. Damaris has been everywhere. London, New Jersey. Margarita, you got to say where in New Jersey. As somebody who's lived in New Jersey, I always appreciate that. From Montreal, welcome, Marlo. More from Bangladesh and more from India, welcome. Oh, Noel, so glad to see you. I remember we had a one-on-one. I'm so glad you're able to make it. Dumont, New Jersey. We know Dumont. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining the session today. We are going to have a Q&A towards the end of the session. And I just want to go ahead and briefly go over the agenda. So today what we're going to do is discuss Columbia Climate School. I'm going to give you a little bit of historical context about Columbia University and the Climate School. While it is the newest school within Columbia University, I want to emphasize we actually have a long-standing history within the university. I'll describe why. We'll also talk about our learning community. So who are the current students enrolled at Columbia Climate School? We'll discuss who they are, because I always like to stress you're not only coming to Columbia for the faculty and the resources, but you're also coming for the network and who you're learning side by side with. So we'll discuss that. I'm also going to then touch on the 2 graduate degree programs with which we are offering and with which admissions is currently open for the fall 2025 semester, specifically the MA in Climate and Society program, as well as the brand new MS in Climate program. We'll go over those degree programs. We'll talk about the Climate Core. We'll talk about the difference between the programs. We'll also touch on professional development opportunities here at Columbia Climate School through our career management office, the different events that they host, whether it's sustainability skills seminars, one-on-one advising, things of that nature, we're definitely going to touch on. And then finally, we'll wrap up with financial aid and the application process. And again, for those of you joining us today, I want to stress that the admissions application is open for fall 2025. So if you are interested in fall 2025, you can go ahead and start an application today. We can touch on that during the admissions process shortly. But without further ado, what I'd like to do is also introduce you to Grayson Sussman Squires. Grayson is a graduate of Columbia Climate School, and specifically the MA Climate and Society program this year, 2024. Grayson, I'd love to now hand it over to you. If you could share with us a little bit more about, I always say your climate story, kind of your interest in the climate space, your education background, and a little bit more about kind of your professional goals. That would be super helpful.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alfred, and thanks for having me today. So I'm originally from New York State, so a little bit north of the city, and how I kind of got into climate was from a pretty early age. When I was like 7 or so, An Inconvenient Truth came out, like Al Gore's famous documentary, and my parents were kind of environmentalists of a sense. You know, they dabbled in that space. And when that film came out, they hosted like a watch party at our house, and a bunch of neighbors came over, and we crowded around our very small TV, and we watched this film. And I was like, a grade school kid, but it really left like an indelible mark on me. And since then, in a lot of ways, it's been like a motivator. And I just remember watching this film and being so profoundly impacted by it, like a kid, I guess that makes sense. But after that, I got more involved in environmental issues as a high schooler, and just as an active person in my community. And a big issue we had in upstate New York when I was growing up was around fracking and natural gas extraction. And there was a big conversation in the state about whether we would allow fracking. And I was very involved in opposition to that. And especially in my area, nuclear power plant closed, and the state chose to replace it with a very large natural gas power plant. And I kind of remember, even as a young person, seeing that as totally antithetical to the climate fight. So I was very involved in that process of trying to oppose that pipeline and power plant. And then I went to college. I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and I studied politics, philosophy, and economics, as well as environmental studies there, basically with an eye towards going into environmental policy and law. And I wrote a senior thesis in environmental history of environmental thought, and kind of was pretty much primed to go into law and policy. And then, like a lot of people, COVID kind of changed my plans. During the pandemic, I realized I had never explored like kind of the commercial world or the private sector in any of my internships. And so I decided I really want to get a stable job. It's the pandemic, it's scary. I don't know what's going to happen. So I went and got like the first big corporate job I could get out of college, which was a market research role at a kind of global consultancy in New York City. And I worked for around 2 years after college with hedge funds, which, if you had met me prior to that, you would never thought I would do, but I did. And so I worked with hedge funds, looking across all these different industries and sectors, learning as much as I could about just general private sector investment, commercial opportunities. And after the Inflation Reduction Act passed in August 2022, while I was still working, all of my hedge fund clients suddenly became very interested in the free money the government was handing out for climate action, clean tech, clean energy. And I realized there was this huge wealth of financial energy that was going to go into the climate fight from the private sector. And I realized I wanted to be part of steering that capital in the right direction and being part of that solution. So I decided, okay, now's the time. I'm going to go make the jump into like clean energy and climate mitigation broadly. I didn't really know what that looked like yet. So I tried to see if I could get some jobs, really couldn't without specific education. And so I looked into grad programs, and I found the MA in Climate and Society. A friend of mine from Wesleyan had done the program a couple years before, and she spoke really highly of it. And so I applied, I spoke with Alfred, I attended an info session like this, and ultimately I got in. And what I decided to do in that program was basically come in, do the full broad core curriculum, but focus my time, my electives, my internship on what really makes me tick, which is clean energy, deployment, finance, and policy, and broadly climate mitigation. So that's what I can speak most closely to. Of course, I can talk about the broad climate core courses in the program, and I can talk a little bit about getting to different electives and different programs at Columbia, and the internship process, and what the process of just being a student at Columbia is like. But my specific area of interest is clean energy, and that's where I work now.
Excellent. Hey, thank you, Grayson. Thank you for that broad overview on kind of your interest, your climate story. We really appreciate that. Grayson will be continuing conversing with all of us again at certain key points as we touch on the curriculum, specifically electives and internships and everything like that. So stay tuned for more to hear more from Grayson. In terms of now, I want to touch on specifically the Columbia Climate School and the history of it. So let's back up a little. We'll talk about Columbia University itself. Columbia University is the fifth oldest university here in the United States, the oldest in the state of New York. But when you say Columbia University, you're referring to a major research institution, many would argue being a blueprint for research institutions around the world. So underneath the umbrella Columbia University are over 20 different schools, most of those being professional graduate schools. So you can think of, for example, Columbia Business School, Columbia Law School, Columbia School of Journalism, the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. The list goes on. The newest school launched at Columbia University, which was announced in 2020 and formally launched in 2021, is Columbia Climate School. And Columbia Climate School, its ethos is kind of the world requires knowledge leaders to work with business, communities, governments, and civil society to address the climate crisis. Columbia Climate School's graduate degree programs and other learning opportunities provide, and I want to lead into, an interdisciplinary knowledge base for climate leaders with diverse interests and backgrounds. It's most important to emphasize its interdisciplinary in nature as we are growing our professors, professors of climate, I should say. For example, Professor Sheila Foster, she is a lawyer coming to us with a very, very strong climate justice lens. And then we have Professor Ming-Pong Ting, who's a climate scientist in atmospheric science as a professor of climate. So all of these professors are coming together from very different research, very different backgrounds, all coming to teach our students specifically on methods to address the climate crisis. And again, we are expecting our students to be interdisciplinary in nature. In terms of when I say that we have a long-standing history, you're again going to say, well, Alfred, you said you were announced in 2020 and launched in 2021. Columbia Climate School was not developed out of thin air. There's a major component of the climate school that is embedded within it, and it's called Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. That's a 189-acre research campus that's been with Columbia University for over 75 years. It's photographed in that lower right corner, right there in Rockland County on the Hudson River. And there's over 300 PhD level researchers that are based there. But Lamont has done incredible work in the climate space. So for example, one of our Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory researchers in the 1970s was the first academic to coin the term global warming in a research paper. Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory is also responsible for developing the first model to accurately predict extreme weather events associated with El Nino. So all that's to say, Columbia Climate School has been in the climate game for decades. And so now forming the climate school itself, it gives us a method to continue developing and building out degrees. And in fact, we're going to talk about one of the newest degrees with which we developed. But first, let me now touch on the student profile. So who's currently studying at Columbia Climate School? We just welcomed our new cohort here at the end of September of students. It's roughly 120 students matriculated into Columbia Climate School. In terms of their makeup, about 44% are international. 27 countries of citizenship are represented, 18 domestic states of representation. Approximately 15% of the students are the first in their family to attend college or university. We're always very proud of that. We call that here in the United States a first-generation college student. And then finally, the average age in the program is 26 years old. But I will say it's a very diverse makeup of students, and about 20% of the students that enrolled this year, as well as roughly the same ratio, interestingly, for Grayson's cohort, about 20% had 5 or more years of professional work experience when they enrolled. So we have a very diverse kind of learning community. And then in terms of academic backgrounds, I want to highlight that what they've majored in undergrad, what their specific degrees are also quite different. So about 2/3 of the students have social science degrees. About 1/3 of the students have more traditional STEM degrees, like the natural and earth sciences or engineering degrees. And again, in our cohort, what I think is really so fascinating is you're sitting in, you might have, for example, an interest in climate with a public health lens. And then you're sitting next to somebody like Grayson, who has a deep interest in renewable energy and financing those renewable energy projects. And then you have somebody next to Grayson on the other side, for example, that is thinking about climate policy, and you really want to work in the policy space as it relates to climate related issues. So it isn't, and then you even have some STEM students that might be interested in carbon management and carbon capture technology, for example. So it's a very, very diverse group of students. There's one through line through all of you, and that is that climate core, which we will touch on shortly. So I'm going to now dive into the 2 degree programs, and I'm going to have Grayson kind of reflect on his own experiences in the MA program and specifically the climate core. But let's do a really high level summary of what we're discussing today. So I'll first touch on the program that we've had for several years, the MA Climate and Society. In fact, the MA Climate and Society pre-exists Columbia Climate School. We thankfully inherited the MA Climate and Society from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. So it's been around for nearly 2 decades. But this is a 34 credit hour 1 year program. It's traditionally completed in 3 semesters. The vast majority of our students are full-time students. It always begins in the fall. And you'll notice that we have an enrollment plan full-time or part-time. There is a small contingent of students in the MA Climate and Society program that are able to attend part-time. In last year's cohort, the cohort that Grayson just graduated from, there were just 4 part-time students. In this year's cohort, we welcomed 8 part-time students. So it's a smaller number of part-time students, and it's a very kind of prescribed enrollment model. We'll talk about that shortly. In terms of the MA Climate and Society, the practical experience that we will have embedded moving forward in this program will be a capstone that is going to be completed in your final summer semester. And then finally, this is a STEM designated program. The newest program that we also will be detailing today is the MS in Climate. This program deviates most certainly in length. It's a 50 credit hour program that would be completed in 4 semesters or 21 months in length. This program only allows for a full-time enrollment. And then in terms of your practical experience, we have both an internship as well as a capstone built within the MS in Climate program. And this program is also STEM designated. So again, those are just very high level distinctions. We're going to dive a little deeper shortly. But first, let's touch on the MA in Climate and Society program. The MA in Climate and Society, again, is a STEM designated 1 year, 34 credit program. Interdisciplinary graduate degree, I want to lean into that trains professionals and academics to understand and address the impacts of climate variability and change on society and the environment. Through classes and research, students gain knowledge in physical and social sciences and humanities as it relates to climate. In terms of just a very broad overview, again, the program begins in the fall semester. It is a 3-semester sequence. The most of your fall semester will be made up of the climate core, along with a course called Applied Climate 1. And then the second semester is going to be made up of the climate core. You'll be wrapping up the climate core by then, followed through with an elective journey, an Applied Climate 2 course. And then finally, the summer semester is going to be made up of electives along with a capstone, a requirement that goes into that summer semester. The capstone requirement is a mandatory component of your graduation requirements. Now, interestingly, in years past, because I don't want there to be that much confusion, but I just want to give a little bit of high level, Grayson's going to talk about a really robust internship experience that he pursued this year, a very compelling one at that. The MA Climate Society program did used to have either an internship or a capstone option. The program for next year is evolving to strictly a capstone. But I think what this is highlighting as we talk about internships is that we have a longstanding history of having students enter internships. So we're very familiar with that process. So I just want to avoid any confusion there, but Grayson's going to talk about his internship experience later in the presentation as well. So now let me touch on the climate core, the required courses that all MA Climate and Society students will be completing while enrolled in this program. And the program every single year gains additional feedback from our students, from our professors, from industry to hear exactly what they want to see our students coming out of. And actually, the first core course I will touch on is a direct addition relating to student feedback. So we last year hosted this course. It's Climate Justice Theory, Practice, and Policy as a elective course. And for the fall 2025 cohort, this course will be a part of the climate core sequence. And again, it's very important because this course is going to delve into climate justice by examining the ways climate change, as we all know, disproportionately affects historically marginalized communities. So if you're going to be a climate professional, we feel climate justice is a critical lens with which you must have going out regardless of industry or sector where you're going to be making a difference. Another new addition is the history of the climate crisis. And this is going to be a course that considers historical, social, ethical, and political life of global warming in an effort to better understand the present climate age. And then we're going to touch on the 2 pillars of addressing climate change, which is climate change mitigation. You heard Grayson speak about mitigation quite a bit. and then also climate change adaptation. So we were going to touch on both of those courses in the climate core. They're critical. Every single climate professional should have an anchored understanding in mitigation as well as adaptation. And then the final two courses are going to be the STEM, what I like to refer to as STEM related courses. The first one being dynamics of climate variability and change. Arguably, although I would love to hear Grayson's opinion on this, the most challenging climate core course, especially for students that don't have the STEM background. This course is rigorous, but that's why you're interested in a Columbia University degree. You want to be challenged. So this is largely the physics of climate change. I always say this is going to teach you kind of the this course is going to give you the understandings of the science behind climate change, and you'll also be able to articulate that to different constituents. And then the final course is quantitative models for climate application. This is going to be your climate data course. Climate data is critical. The reason why we know and can prove climate change is occurring is through the data. So this course is critical from that standpoint. And being able to understand and make decisions based off of data, regardless of industry or sector, today we're talking about climate, is also critical. So every student will be exploring a quantitative models for climate application course. And again, you're going to be using the computer language program R. I'd like to pause there, and I'd love to hear kind of, Grayson, your thoughts on the climate core. Obviously, you also came into this program with that robust social science background. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on the dynamics course as well, and navigating that and quantitative models. I should note dynamics is taught in a flipped classroom models where there's lectured recording. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the core in general.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first I'll just start with a caveat, which is I can't really speak to the two new courses. Although the climate justice class that Professor Foster taught, or will be teaching, I guess, was taught as an elective, I sadly did not take it, although I heard rave reviews, and I really can't emphasize enough what Alfred just said about how important climate justice is in whatever field of climate you go into. I mean, just speaking from a clean energy perspective, it's actually really important because in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a significant aim of trying to build clean energy in areas that have been burdened by fossil fuels in the past and are seen as energy justice communities. So even if you go into like the most commercial private sector part of climate world, which I think I'm probably in compared to many of my peers in the program, climate justice is still there. So I would just say that it's really great to see this becoming part of the core. Um, in terms of the core courses that I was a part of, I'll start with dynamics just to get that out of the way. Now, there is so much hype that dynamics is this, ridiculously difficult thing, and it's so hard, but it's not. And you can take that from me. Like, I came from about as social science a background as you can possibly get. I just read for 4 years in college, and I didn't touch anything with a number. But dynamics was actually really fun, and I loved it. And the professors, we had Professor Ming Fan Ting, and then also um, we had I'm going to butcher her last name, so I'm not even going to get in there.
I can do it, Michaela Biasuti. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I just call her Michaela. But they taught it together, and as Alfred said, it was a flipped classroom setup. So it was my first time in that kind of a setup. So they recorded all the lectures and basically put those on our like learning platform. So that was super helpful because you could watch them over and over again, pause them, go back and forth, and just review them throughout the course of this semester. And then when you go into class, it's really about answering questions, reinforcing the ideas from the lectures, and applying them in problem sets or in fun like learning activities. And as much as this is a STEM science class, it's a STEM science class mainly taught for social science people. Because if you look at the cohorts, as Alfred had, that graph up there earlier, mainly these are people in the program who aren't super STEM lords, so to speak. And I found it to be really an accessible way to learn about the dynamics and physical science of climate change, to the point that I feel pretty comfortable, with my cranky uncle at Thanksgiving, schooling him on why climate change is real. And a lot of the course is really geared to like improving how we talk about the science of climate change for a lay audience, because there's a recognition in the program that most of the students in the master's aren't actually going to go do climate science. They're going to be communicators of climate science or climate risk, or policymakers who have to understand the climate science. So dynamics is hard, but it's not terrible, and you're going to love it. And you're going to work with a lot of your peers on problem sets and group projects. So you're never really alone in that class. The class I found most difficult of the core was actually the quant class. And that's partially because in my undergrad, I regrettably did not take a stats class. And so the like last time I did anything with data and stats was in high school, and I just felt very out to sea with that. But I would say I was pretty unique in that regard. And most of my peers had at least taken like an elementary stats class in college and were very capable in the quantitative models class. And that one is also probably the most helpful to me now because I had such a low baseline. I was able to learn a lot very quickly and now can credibly say I can do like data science and data analysis when I'm talking to employers and stuff like that. So the quant class is definitely great, and it's like the biggest crash course you've ever done in terms of stats and data analysis. And then basically back to those two pillars, adaptation and mitigation. I mean, these are kind of the bread and butter, I would say, of the core courses. This is where you're like figuring out where in climate world you want to be, and how I still kind of categorize people as like trying to think, oh, do you work on mitigation? Do you work on adaptation? And so I said it before, like I'm squarely on mitigation. So it will come as no surprise that that was my favorite core course and the one I like put the most amount of effort into getting into the weeds in. And basically, that's a class where you look across every sector of the economy and you look at all the ways that we are causing climate change, whether that's from like industrial manufacturing, whether it's from energy production or agriculture, and then you assess the different market forces, policy mechanisms, and technology solutions that enable us to decarbonize and reduce our impact on the climate. So that's a really incredible course. You also there's a justice component in there, and there's an international perspective in there. Adaptation was less relevant to me because of what my interests are, but it was also very interesting. This is more of a policy oriented class, I would say, just because adaptation doesn't really lend itself to a private sector model as well. So I know a lot of my peers who are more interested in policy or think tank work generally gravitated towards adaptation, and super valuable, definitely like an international development lens there as well. So I highly recommend that course as well, just if you're interested in learning about like the international component of climate negotiations, because a lot of that comes down to adaptation.
Excellent. Hey, thank you, Grayson.
Yeah,
I'm gonna rewatch this recording because I feel like you explain the core better than I do. I'm loving it. So,
it is blasphemy, Alfred. Come on.
so in terms of, I wanted to just briefly touch on the climate and society because when we were talking about the distinction of the enrollment plans for the MA and the MS, I want to briefly mention, yes, climate and society program. For those of you in the audience that might be thinking of, you're in the tri-state area, you might want to do this part-time because you're specifically in a professional role right now. Part-time could be an option. So students enrolling in the part-time program generally include kind of one or more of the following profiles: people with demonstrated significant work experience in climate or climate adjacent space, working professionals currently in any space that can reasonably assert that they can readily apply the MA Climate Society program to their current work or to easily transition to climate or a related field where they can apply the program to that profession. The part-time students that we've seen come into the program, for example, Grayson has one of the students in Grayson's cohort that she's now completing her second year. She's working at a large consulting firm in a sustainability consulting role, so clearly she's taking what she's learning and can then apply it to the practice. And usually that is going to be the case. The students that are enrolling in this program are individuals that are working, and there's a great deal of relevance to taking what they're learning in this and applying it to their professional roles. When you're applying to the program, we will ask, are you interested in part-time? So you will be asked to indicate yes or no when it comes to the MA Climate and Society program. And if you say yes, you need to provide a brief, compelling reason as to why you need to enroll in the program part-time. I mentioned from the top, it's a very small part-time learning community. I mentioned 4 last year. We welcomed 8 this year. And the program, if you do part-time enrollment, it will become a 2-year program. So just throwing that out there. Now I'm going to touch on the MS in climate, and then we're going to go back to the MA as well when we discuss the elective journey. So stay with me. Now, the MS in climate, this is the newest degree program. We just announced it in September this year. We're formally welcoming our first class in the fall 2025. Some of you joining the call today might be part of that first class. And this is, again, a STEM designated 2-year, 50 credit professional degree programs that gives graduates from diverse backgrounds and in-depth training in specific areas of climate expertise and prepares them to be climate leaders at the community, state, national, and international level. The biggest distinction, obviously, between the MS and the MA is this program length and the ability to dive deeper into a specific topic within the climate space. So MA Climate and Society students, hey, it's 34 3-semester program. MS in Climate, it's a 4-semester, 50 credit program that actually mandates, it's baked into it, a second required credential, forgive me. It's an advanced certificate, which we will talk about shortly. But the fall semester begins with the climate core, which is, I'm going to talk about the distinction, but it's Grayson summarized it beautifully because they're nearly identical. So something I want to note, MS in climate students and MA in climate and society students will be sharing the same classroom space in the climate core. You will be mixing and mingling with one another definitively in the climate core. The spring semester is a continuation of the climate core. You'll start building in electives, and you will also start tackling your certificate requirement, that second credential that's required of all MS and climate students. We'll talk about the certificate shortly. The summer semester is reserved for, you don't pay tuition during the summer. The summer semester is going to be an internship component that all MS and climate students will take between the first and second year. The fall semester will be the second fall will be the conclusion of the climate core, a continuation of your electives, a continuation of your certificate. And then the final summer is wrapping up your electives, completing your certificate requirements, and then finally completing a mandatory capstone. So again, the MS in climate requires both an internship and a capstone. The MA in climate and society for fall 2025 will only require the capstone. In terms of the MS climate, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to talk about the distinctions because it's virtually the same climate core courses with exception to this. The history of the climate crisis course that we mentioned earlier for the MA Climate and Society, that course is going to be swapped out and you'll be having a second quantitative methods course requirement in the MS and climate program. So you're still doing dynamics, you're still doing climate mitigation and climate adaptation, climate justice, and of course the quantitative models for climate application. But in addition to those, you're going to be completing a second quantitative methods course. This quantitative methods course will depend upon the advanced certificate with which you complete. So in concrete terms, one of the advanced certificates is going to be climate systems and analytics, okay? Climate systems and analytics, those students that select that certificate, that pursue that certificate, they will be completing a quantitative methods course that deals with Python. That's going to be your mandatory course. Now, the other advanced certificates, there's going to be more selectivity, or forgive me, a selective option. Yeah, that's the best word, I guess. There's going to be a couple different quantitative courses that you can choose from if you go with disaster management or climate and food systems. But that is, in essence, the climate core. Again, nearly identical to the MA Climate and Society core. You're sharing the same classroom space, except you will be taking an additional second quantitative methods course, and it's going to be a selective option of courses. The second credential, the advanced certificates, it's important for me to stress that in the admissions application, you will be selecting the certificate that is of most interest to you. I want to emphasize that you will be selecting the certificate that's of most interest to you, but you do not officially declare your certificate until the end of your first semester in the MS and Climate program. So there is a level of flexibility. You might, for example, in the admissions application, say, I'm most interested in climate and food systems, but at the end of your fall semester, your first fall semester, you decide, you know what, it's climate systems and analytics for me. That's when you would officially declare the advanced certificate. So I want to note in your acceptance letter to the MS in Climate program, we also will not reference the advanced certificate you declared an interest in, because it's just that, an interest. You don't declare, think of yourselves as undeclared majors. You don't officially declare the major until the end of your first semester. So now let me just provide brief summaries for each advanced certificate. The first one being Climate Systems and Analytics. It provides the critical skills and understanding to interpret and analyze climate and weather data, and understand climate model predictions and projections, assess climate-related risks to human and natural systems, and develop strategies for mitigating these effects. The second advanced certificate is Climate and Disaster Management. The architect behind that is our Professor Jeffrey Schlegelmelch, who's the director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness. Interestingly, this used to be a specialization within the MA program, and now it's evolved to becoming an advanced certificate within the MS program. And it provides students with foundational knowledge and skills needed to conduct and apply research in various intersecting disciplines relevant to managing disasters. Students will gain new insights into disaster management, particularly in relation to preparedness, responses, recovery, and long-term resiliency best practices. And then finally, the one that I gotta just say, Grayson, I knew nothing about food systems. I still have like a very, but we hired a phenomenal faculty member, Jessica Fanzo, who is just so dynamic. And I attended one of her like talks, and I had so, little understanding of just how much we each are food experts, and a lot of our decisions, how much it greatly impacts climate change. So if you're interested in food systems, if that's something that really excites you, this is going to focus on the intersections of climate with food systems, food production, human livelihoods, and students learn how to apply evidence-based approaches to food system transformation, gaining critical skills and knowledge for professional pathways. So you would end up selecting one of these advanced certificates. And then hot off the presses, I'm very excited to share this. And in fact, I should have had a slide on it, but we literally just learned about it last week. We have a fourth option, not an advanced certificate, but in lieu of an advanced certificate, you could instead pursue what's called a dual degree. And we entered a partnership with the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. And the dual degree is specifically with the Master's of Architecture and Urban Planning. And actually, Damaris, if you wouldn't mind sharing a link to that degree program from the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation in the chat box, that would be great. So if you wanted to do, instead of the advanced certificate, let's say you're really interested in climate and the built environment, you don't have to be an architect for that degree. Essentially, in 2 years, you're getting 2 degrees. And if you're interested in that, there's more information on our website too. We literally just released this detail. Okay, I'm pulling Grayson back in. So in terms of summer internships, I mentioned we have a longstanding history of students performing summer internships at the Climate School, and it's non-credit, and it can be in a variety of organizations. It can be around the country, and in fact, Grayson did his outside of the New York area, but we've had students that have done internships. Really, the list goes on. This is actually a very, very small New York Mayor's Office, the World Food Program. We've had students done their internships at the United Nations or the World Bank. It really and truly, the list goes on. I'll just pause here because I'd love to hear, Grayson, I think your internship is very robust. Can you share a little bit more about your internship?
Yeah, definitely. So I agree. My internship was very robust, and I'm very happy I did it. So this will apply, I guess, if you're going to get into the MS in climate, as that's where the internship will be housed moving forward. But in my cohort, you could do an internship or a capstone in the MA in Climate and Society. So I went into the program knowing I wanted to do an internship just because there's a little bit more flexibility. I could choose exactly what I wanted to do. So I got started very early. I basically started classes and I started looking for internships like in the fall semester, the first half of the fall semester. And I highly recommend being very proactive about this. Like, it's no surprise that you're going to do an internship if you're in the program. So get started early, because like the biggest barrier, I think, for students in the program to getting an internship is that they wait too long. And it's like, April and they're starting to think about it now. That's way too late. So be proactive and start in the fall semester. I did that and I got an offer for an internship in December, and didn't start until June. So I had 6 months of stress-free living because I already knew I was doing an internship. So I interned at Apex Clean Energy, which is an independent power producer. So they develop, own, and operate wind, solar, and battery storage systems across the United States. They're based in Charlottesville, Virginia. So if you're familiar with University of Virginia, they're based in that city. So as Alfred said, I am a New Yorker, but I did go down to Virginia for the summer for the internship, and I'm glad I did because it was very, very fun and I learned so much. So at Apex, I was on the new markets team, and basically what that team is tasked with and what I did is high level like commercial energy market strategy and then early stage commercial development of wind, solar, and storage projects. So basically, I looked for transmission capacity in different electricity markets. So I used some data analysis there, and I was able to do that because of the quant class. I also used a lot of the background in energy systems, energy markets, and energy finance that I developed in my electives, which I can talk more about later, in the other work that I did. So basically, what I did was I looked for greenfield, so new sites for wind and solar projects. And over the course of my internship over the summer, I developed a due diligence deck, so a big PowerPoint with all the risks, attributes, and potential fatal flaws for a 500 megawatt solar farm in Virginia, and then a very large wind site also in the PJM electricity market in the center of the East Coast. So basically, it was like a full-time job, and they treated me like a full-time employee, which was excellent, and I really enjoyed what I did. Ultimately, I decided not to stay on with Apex in a full-time capacity because they are based in Virginia and I am based in New York. Alfred is my neighbor. I didn't want to give that up. So we parted ways, but it was a very, very exciting time and really rewarding. And it's been super helpful as I then came back to New York and started looking for like full-time roles because I was able to use these real world projects that I worked on at Apex in interviews and case studies and kind of show my kind of real knowledge, not just what I had from my courses and classes.
Excellent. Hey, Grayson, thank you. Thank you for that. And yeah, so the summer internship, I want to emphasize that would be the component for the MS climate program. And in terms of the capstone workshop, this is also important to note. This is another opportunity that both MA climate and society students will absolutely do, and then MS and climate students will also do. So this is an overlap feature of both degree programs, and this is going to be during your final semester. This is a 3-credit summer capstone workshop. That's forgive me, the MA students, and it would be a spring capstone for the MS students. And this is a group project, and you're working in a consulting capacity, and we do work with a wide array of organizations. They include the United Nations Foundation of Climate and Environment Program, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. One that we did last year, I believe, was the WFLA TV and Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. This one I especially enjoyed, and actually it's extremely relevant given everything that's happened as it relates to Hurricane Helene and Milton. But this capstone related to the Tampa Bay area's vulnerability compared to other cities along the West Coast, and glean an explanation for the city's vulnerability under current climate conditions. So I'm a native of the Tampa Bay area, and that's why I found that capstone especially interesting. But again, capstones are extremely diverse. We do have the capstone recordings on YouTube. If anybody's interested in watching some recordings of past capstones, especially this most recent cohort, Grayson's cohort capstones, I'm happy to share those as well. I want to just touch on, this is a new element of both programs that slightly reference the applied learning component. So students will be participating in kind of collaborative interdisciplinary learning and practice both inside and outside the classroom. These courses are going to be case-based learning embedded. They are going to be including applied climate seminars focused on skill building and professional development. And we say the applied learning is in those first 2 semesters of the MA and the MS program. but there's also going to be, we classify the internship and the capstone experiences obviously as applied learning as well. So we use this as a broad term. All right, so now I'm going to touch on electives, and I'd love to hear kind of Grayson's approach to the electives because it is wildly different among students. I think especially the MA Climate and Society, that program is extremely flexible. The MS in Climate, obviously, you're coming into that program because one of those advanced certificates or potentially a dual degree is of great interest to you as well, although you also have electives to choose from. So before we go, I would love to hear Grayson's approach. I want to just say I joined the climate school of March of 2022, and at the time there was only 3 electives that were offered that entire academic year from the climate school. And this year there's going to be over 20 electives to choose from for our students. And this is just a sample of some of those electives: politics of climate in Asia, food systems and climate interactions, social impact, business, society, and the environment, climate mobility, climate change law and policy. The list goes on. Climate and energy justice practicum, that was Professor Sheila Foster's course as well. So there's the growing list of Columbia Climate School elective courses is only continuing, and it will only continue, especially as we grow in terms of our student audience and degree programs. But I would like to, and actually right before we go to Grayson, forgive me, one other thing, I think this is always helpful. I really love to highlight this because I don't know, Grayson, I don't think, did you get a chance to take any electives in the summer because you were doing the internship, right?
Yeah, I actually sat in on the financing renewable energy class,
Good.
but
Oh,
then I did drop it in full
okay.
transparency, but mainly because I was doing it at a
Yes,
renewable company. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
it
So
was
yeah,
great though.
yeah. So Nadia Zentz teaches that. And so this was what I like to emphasize is that the administration tries to be extremely thoughtful when it comes to the elective journeys and when to be offering classes. So they test ran that financing renewable energy course in this past summer and got great reviews. So they're offering it again this fall semester, and then they're in conjunction with that, complementing it. They're offering climate policy and investment. So financing renewable energy, I would argue that's going to be this climate finance from a private sector lens, and then and then climate policy and investment would be the policy side of it. That's going to be that is taught by Professor Lisa Sachs. So we're also scaling our climate finance offerings at Columbia Climate School as we recognize that's critical, and that's something Grayson's been touching on. So so there's a lot of growth within that area, and so I like to highlight that we're complementing that. And then of course there's a cross registration journey which we're going to touch on, but it's the idea that hey, when you come to Columbia University, we are an interdisciplinary school. And so we have to be able to appreciate the fact that we are embedded within a research institution by some of the strongest professional graduate degree programs in the United States. So we have students that take courses at Columbia Law School, at the School of International and Public Affairs. We have partner programs through sustainability management and science, for example, the Mailman School of Public Health. But let me pause there. I'm going to do a little bit of a rewind, but I'd love to hear, Grayson, how did you approach electives? What were your thoughts? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I think how I approached electives is generally in line with how I approached the program. So if you haven't picked up on this already, I'll say it very explicitly. The programs at Columbia Climate School are very interdisciplinary and they're very broad. And you can be a mile wide and an inch deep, or you can do kind of what I did, which was I knew what I wanted to do and what I wanted to get out of the program. I wanted to work in clean energy, finance, policy markets, kind of in that sphere. So I went in, okay, I'll take these core classes because it's part of the program and that'll give me a holistic knowledge base. But then everything I choose to do on top of that, from electives to internships, will be directly relevant and applicable to what I want to work in. So that's one approach. I have peers and colleagues who took classes across all sorts of different areas and really wanted to explore climate and be jacks of all trades. That's a different approach. And, whatever fits for you will fit for you and you'll make the best of it. But I went in with a pretty specific plan when it came to my electives. And one of the reasons I chose Columbia was just referring back to that last slide. Alfred had up with all the different programs and schools that you can cross-register in, I saw being at the climate school as a huge resource because I would be able to cross-register into all these incredible other programs. And I was getting the best of the climate school through the core courses, and then I could get the best of these other schools from their electives. So I didn't take a single elective in the climate school. That's not because they aren't excellent. They are, but I just wanted to go to other things. I did kind of sit in on that renewable financing class over the summer, and it was great. But to be honest, I had just taken that class in another form previously, so it wasn't something I needed to do at the time. But I took, I think I took 5 electives. So one of them was in the law school. That was climate change law and policy with Professor Michael Gerard. Professor Gerard wrote the book on climate law. He literally wrote the book. He is like the person in the world, in the United States, who has done the most to advance climate litigation and climate law theory and practice. So if you get a chance to take his class in the law school, I highly recommend it. I know Sheila Foster taught a version of it, which was also well regarded, but she's worked with him and co-edited a book with him, I think. So you're definitely getting the cream of the crop from either of them. But I chose to take the version with him in the spring semester because it worked out better for my schedule. And because Professor Gerard is affiliated in some way with the climate school, it's pretty easy to get into that class as a climate and society student because they kind of leave some excess space in the law school to register climate and society students. So that was pretty easy, painless cross-registration into the law program. I also took 3 electives in the School of Professional Studies through the SUMA program, the Sustainable Management program. So I took financing clean energy with Leslie Rich, who was formerly a banker and now is at the Loan Programs Office at the Department of Energy. I took energy markets and innovation with Travis Bradford, who's a professor in SUMA and is like a world-renowned energy VC investor. And I also took economics of sustainable management with Professor Alexander Heil in SUMA, and he's the chief economist at the Conference Board, which is a think tank and advisory organization based in New York that works with Fortune 500 CEOs. So these are like the people doing the work in the real world, and they're also teaching at Columbia. And so that was a big reason why I chose those classes, and they all were very relevant to what I wanted to work in. And the cross-registration in SUMA is also pretty painless because there's a good partnership between the climate school. I recommend just being proactive because those classes are competitive and people can get in from any school at Columbia. So just reach out to the professors ahead of time, express your interest in why you want to take the class. I would definitely advise you to tell them why you would be an additional, valuable addition to the class and what you would contribute. And then just be quick with your keyboards when the registration window opens at 8 a.m. on a Monday or whatever. Just set your alarm for 7:50 and then click add course and you should be fine. I took 1 class in SEPA as well, which was amazing. That was also a pretty painless registration process. The only thing with that is you just have to wait until all the SEPA students are done registering for their classes. And then if there are spaces left over, you can get in. And I did that without any issue. I mean, it was a little bit nerve-wracking because I wasn't sure, but I just monitored the class every day during drop ad and saw there were still spaces. And then I was in touch with the professor and he was pretty cool with me joining. So I got into a great class in SEPA called Practicing Clean Energy Policy, and that was taught by John Rhodes, who's now the CEO of the Long Island Power Authority, was previously the CEO of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Agency. He was at the Biden White House as the chief senior advisor on domestic climate policy. So these are the people in the world who have done the climate work that exists to this date. So being able to register into their classes was amazing. I know the climate school has added a ton of great electives, and many of my peers took them and found them to be super important, valuable. So I'm really excited to see all the new classes that are being added. And people will complain and say that cross registration is difficult, but just don't listen to them. It's fine.
Thanks. Great. See, Grayson breaks it down for you. And I love it that you guys are hearing from Grayson's perspective on it because I think what's really great is there's a huge value add to coming to a Columbia University for that reason. And we are interdisciplinary. So I will say our next session, we're going to have, actually, you're going to get a kick out of this, Grayson. Van from your cohort, as well as Alora, are going to be
Yeah.
participating. I really would recommend, guys, register for the next sessions on November 4th because they have different professional backgrounds and the approaches to the elective journey. So I think it's like very helpful to hear broad spectrum. Definitely check that one out too. And then for those of you that are thinking about the MS in climate, it's important to note that your advanced certificates, there's absolutely still room for elective, but your advanced certificates are going to be 18 credits of your 50 credit journey. So you're really going to dive into the subject of climate systems and analytics or climate and food systems or disaster management. So that's another to nuance to know. Um, all right, excellent, excellent, excellent. So I also want to highlight, we have career resources and professional development opportunities here at Columbia Climate School. We have a dedicated career management office. This is another office that actually grew quite a bit since the time I joined. We had one person in the office. Now we have three people leading the efforts between somebody dedicated really to the alumni engagement and doing alumni matching, and then two individuals that are more on the ground doing a lot of one-on-one career counseling. They host employer info sessions, resume and cover letter reviews, alumni mentorship program, sustainability skills seminars. That's something we host every year, whether it's getting LEED certification or sustainability consulting. We typically host around 12 different sustainability skills seminars each year. In fact, I know Damaris is helping me out on the Q&A right now, and the most recent weekly newsletter listed all the skills seminars. I'm not sure if it's worth typing those in the chat box or pasting them. I think they're kind of interesting. We also have the All Ivy Environmental and Sustainable Development Career Fair. This career fair has been going on for 10 plus years. It's open to all the Ivy Leagues. They around nearly 100 employers and 1,000 students descend upon the Columbia University campus each February. We also have mock interviews and then an exclusive responsive job board. And then this is just to give you an idea of the employment of the class of 2022 and the class of 2023. So this is a combination of the two. About 31% go into the private sector, 21% go into the public sector. You'll see there that 27% is also nonprofit NGO space. Some students do go on to further their academic pursuits. We've had many students go on to PhD programs in law school, for example. And then we do have some students that go on into academic and professional research roles. In terms of professional roles in these two recent cohorts, we've had a student go on to the World Bank as a climate policy analyst. We've had McKinsey as a sustainability insight analyst, Boston Consulting Group as an associate specifically in climate sustainability. Those would be some examples of kind of private sector. And then we have a lot of students that go into different governments, City of Los Angeles, City of Seattle. We also have students at the Environmental Protection Agency. We've had students go into media roles. So this is just a very small sampling of where students go on to. It's an interesting program. Again, I want to lean into interdisciplinary because there's no cookie cut professional role for us. We're not a very specific graduate degree where you have literally two different industries and four different professional jobs to choose from. Climate is dynamic, climate is always evolving, and the spaces to work within climate are always evolving. So, and I think you can see that in terms of where our students go on to work. I'm going to now just touch on financial aid. We do offer merit scholarships. They're called climate school scholarships. And I want to stress that every single year, scholarship opportunities have been increasing, and we continue to increase those through the gifts that our development office receives. This year, we were able to have the highest percentage of students receiving a scholarship. For the fall 2024 enrolling class, it was around just under 60%. It was like 58% of the students received a merit scholarship. And then we also, and if you're interested in merit scholarships, we strongly encourage that you apply um, by the January 15th priority deadline. I'll talk about that shortly. And then we also have an external fellowship directory. Um, if you don't mind, Damaris, if we could copy and paste that directly in the chat box as well. I think students find that helpful. If you're interested in outside support, now is the time to start researching. So we always recommend that you start doing your due diligence and researching outside external fellowships and scholarship opportunities. And then we do have a sizable number of our students do utilize federal and private loans to help fund their graduate education. Our office next year will be utilizing the Columbia University Student Financial Services Office. I will say for students that are U.S. citizens or permanent residents, you do have more options through federal loans, but we do have international students that have been able to secure private loans. Companies like Empower or Prodigy Finance frequently work with Columbia University students. And if you have more questions about that, you're welcome to schedule a one-on-one appointment with myself as well, which we'll have a link shortly on that. So now let me touch on the online application process. So first and foremost, it is a holistic review, and the application requirements are identical for both the MA in Climate and Society program and the MS in Climate program. We are going to ask you to upload your resume. We need 2 letters of reference. One must be academic only if you've been enrolled in a university within the last 5 years. So if you've been enrolled in an undergraduate university within the last 5 years, we need an academic recommendation letter. But if it's been more than 5 years, you're welcome to use a professional recommendation letter. We also, or 2 professional recommendation letters, I should say. We also ask for your unofficial transcripts that be uploaded to the online application system. And then if you're joining us today and English is not your native language and was not the language of instruction in your undergraduate university, we will need an English language test, either the TOEFL, the IELTS, or the Duolingo English test. We give you 3 options. And because English is the medium of instruction here at Columbia University, we absolutely need to see a strong foundation in the English language. So we need a 100 on the TOEFL, that is our minimum, a 7.5 on the IELTS, or a 135 on the Duolingo English test. Finally, a statement of purpose is also going to be required. Many of you will ask, am I required to submit a GRE? GRE is optional, but if you've taken one and you think the score is strong and represents your abilities, by all means, send the GRE score to Columbia Climate School. Our admissions committee is happy to review that, but it is optional. If you are applying to the MS in Climate program and you don't have many math courses under your belt, it might behoove you, I'm leaning into the word might, to take the GRE to show some more quantitative capabilities. But again, this year, the GRE is completely optional for both degree programs. In terms of the deadlines, everybody joining me today, if you're interested in Fall 25, should absolutely apply by January 15th, 2025. That increases your chances of receiving a Climate and Society scholarship, or Climate School scholarship, I should say, and decisions are released by March. That gives you more time for your planning and determining if the Columbia Climate School is the best fit for you. And then finally, the final decision is March 1st, 2025. But again, all of you are applying by January 15th. So March 1st is just a nice to know. In terms of this statement of purpose, I want to lean into this a little bit more because this is critical. And remember, so many students will ask me, Alfred, what is the admissions? How do I set myself apart? What's the admissions committee looking for? Well, there's an X factor to you as a candidate and what you bring to the table. Remember, the admissions committee, yes, they want to make sure that you're genuinely interested in climate. Yes, they want to make sure that you can succeed in our rigorous curriculum, but they also want to see, are you going to be additive to the classroom? Are you going to be additive to the learning community? Is your perspective going to just elevate the overall experience for all students? So that is going to be, you're going to be able to illuminate on that specifically in your statement of purpose. So please share the key experiences that have contributed to your commitment to work on climate change issues. In addition, what are your academic and professional goals, and what knowledge and skills are you hoping to develop through enrollment in the climate school? And finally, why is enrollment in Climate and Society, so this is for the MA program specifically, why is enrollment in Climate and Society critical in helping you achieve your goals? And which Climate and Society core course are you most excited to complete? Now, Grace, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you remember what core course you might have selected?
Yeah, I do remember it because it wasn't offered. They changed the
Oh,
core
yes, they
courses.
changed it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do remember because I just remember writing. If I'm completely honest, Alfred, I was looking at the core courses and was like, I don't know if any of these are like the thing as
No,
I'm most excited for.
no.
But it was risk. It was they offered a risk
Managing attack.
management.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and
It ended up
I
evolving. You know
yeah,
what? That course evolved to mitigation, I
yeah,
think. I think
yeah.
that's what,
I think that
yes.
makes the most sense, just
Yeah.
considering what I was interested in. So, I mean, I said that. I mean, I had to say something. I
You
don't know
had to say something. See,
if it
you guys
was
get, I love this. Everybody here is getting that unvarnished Grayson approach. I love it. I love it. I think the reason why the committee, it's still baked into the statement of purpose is, remember, because there's so much flexibility around the MA Climate and Society, we want to make sure that you have that genuine hunger for the climate core. And so this year, you have quite a few options. You have mitigation and adaptation. Maybe it is dynamics. Maybe you're genuinely like, hey, I'm jazzed to learn the science behind climate change. Perhaps it's climate justice, recognizing that different communities are impacted by climate change, and especially the most under-resourced communities or marginalized communities are especially most gravely impacted by it. You can incorporate climate justice as the course. So just be reflective on which climate core course you're most interested in completing and exploring, so to speak. And then the MS in Climate program is a nearly identical statement of purpose, with exception to one caveat. We do want to better understand which advanced certificate you're most interested in. And it is important because, think about it, it's a 50 credit program, and 18 of those credits are going to be made up of climate systems analytics, or climate and food systems, or disaster management. So I would definitely recommend be reflective on that in the statement of purpose. Um, and boy, that wraps it up. I am so sorry. I ran way over time, Grayson, and I apologize, because this is your time, and I so thank you for this. If you, Grayson, can you stay for 5 minutes just in case if there's an interesting Q&A?
yeah, I can stay until 11:30
Okay,
at the
brilliant.
latest.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Okay. So we have some questions. Damaris, did you want to open up or shout some out that might be interesting, especially for Grayson?
Sure. Is volunteer experience in the climate space considered relevant work? And is any work experience necessary to apply?
Work experience is always helpful. It's always going to enhance your candidacy. We can definitely emphasize that. But is it mandatory that you come into this program having work experience in the climate space? For neither program, no, it's not mandatory at all. We do recognize that many students are discovering climate or pivoting to climate, so this might be something that you've kind of recently become passionate about. And as long as you can articulate that passion, many students in the statement of purpose, sometimes they're very reflective on their interest in climate because it might be a personal journey that they've specifically experienced. We have many students enrolled in our program, for example, that are from, actually, I distinctly remember some students, it was like two cohorts ago, a student that was from Mobile, Alabama, and like the BP kind of oil spill that occurred in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico was deeply impactful for that given student. They referenced that. I've seen some really powerful essays relating to students that grew up in, for example, Beijing, and talking about the air quality there and seeing the difference between that specific region and maybe where their families are from in other regions of China. And so it's oftentimes your motivations can also be a personal motivation. It doesn't necessarily mean that in order to be competitive for this program, yes, you had to have, been an intern in a climate finance shop, or specifically, was working with the EPA. That's not necessarily the case. Was that helpful? Now I'm looking from feedback from you, Damaris. I'm like,
Yes, it was
yeah,
helpful. Thank you. And then I guess this is a question for both you and Grayson. Can you give out any tips or recommendations to make your application stand out?
Um, yeah, I
we're
guess.
pretty good.
Well, I can speak from my personal experience on how I tried to make myself stand out. I don't know anything
Absolutely.
about the questioner or their background, so I will not
Yes.
speak for them. But
Yeah.
yeah, So I mean, this kind of relates to the previous question, but I didn't work in a specific climate field. I worked for around 2 years before coming to Columbia, and I worked in like broadly market research for investors, and that could be in pharmaceuticals, it could be in like the auto industry, it could be broadly technology. It was anything. So what I wanted to show in my application was my kind of the difference I brought was that I was coming from a very commercial perspective. And in this program, I don't think that's the norm. I think most people are coming from like research or policy or maybe technology and science, but there aren't as many people coming from like a just purely commercial background. So I kind of played that up as a unique factor in my application. I also talked about some of the relevant work I did do that was related to the climate and how that had kind of deepened my interest in going back to school and working specifically in clean energy. So while I was working, I worked on projects related to solar, wind, energy storage, EVs, all sorts of kind of clean tech and clean energy projects. And so I referenced that in my application to show like, look, I have learned about this and worked on this, and it's something I want to learn about more. And that's why I want to come to this program. I think you want to address to the enrollment committee that you're committed to this work. So showing that you have a little interest is always good to do that, that you've worked on it and it's something you want to pursue more. That can only be beneficial in my eyes.
That was great. Thank you, Grayson. Hold on. I'm so sorry. I took us off because I saw an interesting question I wanted to quickly go grab. Damaris, can you do me a favor? Can you make sure the one-on-one appointments are linked in the chat if they're not already? Forgive me, just to make sure students can book appointments with myself. And also, can you link the appointments? We have current students enrolled in the program, Rishabh, Peyton, and Gabby, who all are willing to take one-on-one appointments, which is great. If you wanted to speak to students that are currently enrolled in this cohort, Damaris is going to go ahead and copy and paste the one-on-one appointment calendar for them as well. But there was one other question. One question is, in terms of, although the GRE is not required for this program, would submitting the high GRE score add value to the application? By all means, yeah, we are not going to prevent you from submitting a strong GRE score to this program. If you feel strongly in your GRE score, by all means, send it. It absolutely could be additive to your candidacy. Another question at the very top is, how can we choose climate and society in the two-year MS program? In the admissions application, there is the section that states program of interest. You will choose one. You will either choose the MA in climate and society or the MS in climate program. Important to note, you are not able to apply to both programs. In addition, are there opportunities to explore each of these certificate options before declaring? Yes, absolutely, City. And in fact, you know what I recommend doing? We have a virtual info session. Another one, as you as a prospective student, we have a virtual info session that's going to be taking place in the month of November. And during that session, Radley Horton, who's the faculty lead for climate systems and analytics, Jeff Schlegelmelch, who's the faculty lead for disaster management, and Jason Smurden, who is the co-director of the MS in Climate program, will be participating. Definitely attend that session. You're going to hear more about the advanced certificates, but there will be absolutely during your first semester kind of exploratory info sessions for the certificate opportunities, so you're really confident in your selection. Would having a strong experience in climate leadership and advocacy on a grassroots level in developing countries, especially climate vulnerable countries, benefit when applying? Absolutely. Grayson, I see you shaking your head like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like one of the commonalities that a lot of people in climate and society had in my cohort was a lot of us got started working in climate from like an activist lens, so to speak, like, and that was from different places. Like I'm from New York State, not a developing country, not especially vulnerable in some ways to climate change compared to others. But that was how I got interested in climate change generally, was from that activist tradition. And there were definitely a lot of people in my cohort who brought that perspective. And I think it's great because it adds some of the urgency to the conversations in the climate school. You can imagine, we're sitting there talking about solutions, and a lot of it is policy and finance and sciencey stuff. But having that urgent perspective of someone on the ground who's actively being harmed by the climate crisis is very helpful for putting things in perspective. And I think it lends credibility to you as an applicant. Of course, it shows you have a demonstrated history of being involved in this space and you're interested in it and you're committed to it. So that's great. Kind of what I was getting at before. So I think, highlighting that is definitely beneficial.
Excellent. Well, listen, I just wanted to say another one question that came up about tuition. The tuition for Climate and Society is public on the Climate and Society website. The MS in Climate, we will be releasing the tuition this month, I promise. We're still getting final approvals because it is a new degree program. So the tuition will be slightly different, but I can say it's going to be a flat rate tuition where you can take up to 18 credit hours per semester, and it's going to be a 4-semester tuition sequence. So more information this month will be coming. And I'd also want to stress and emphasize that every year we're only growing in terms of our scholarship resources and merit scholarship resources. So I really encourage you to apply and you'll because I know tuition can be intimidating, but you don't know whether it's feasible or not until you apply, you're admitted, and then the decision truly is up to you. So I want to just take this moment to say huge thank you, Grayson. Thank you so much for giving your time, for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate you. I'll probably see you on Broadway. Right. So, but
yeah. Thanks for having me, Alfred. I know many of the participants have been stalking my LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. My only request is if you do reach out, just put a message in your request that you were on this call, because we all get lots of connections from random strangers, and I don't love to accept them if I don't know that we actually have some commonality. So just say, hey, I was on the call. I'd like to talk more about climate and society, and I'm much more likely to accept your connection.
Awesome. Hey, very generous of you, Grayson. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Have a phenomenal rest of the week, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.
Bye.